Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm excited for this episode today. Before I introduce our guest, here's a quote I picked just for this episode. Constantly probe the people who report to you and encourage them to probe you. Ray Dalio, my good friend Phil Treadwell is back, founder of M1 Academy, speaker, mindset coach, friend, mentor, friend of the Culture Matters podcast. Podcast I want to shout out, a mortgage marketing expert and the Business of Success podcast.
Yeah, that's our newest one.
Look out for that. Thanks for coming back. What I can say about Phil is if you think you don't need someone to help you, look in the mirror and you're going to see Phil behind you with a grin, ready to help if you're smart enough. Thanks for coming back.
I mean, I appreciate you having me on. It's so funny. I tell people all the time, it's weird to call myself a coach. I played sports, and what I do in coaching is very different than what a sports coach does. I think conceptually, maybe it's the same, but I'm typically not going to teach someone on something, coach someone on something that they couldn't eventually figure out on their own or learn from somewhere else. My job is really threefold. It's to help identify blind spots, it's to shorten that learning curve, and it's to hold them accountable to what they want to be held accountable to. What are the standards that they want? So our mission with M1 Academy is to help people perform and execute at the level they're capable of. It's not my job to tell them what they're capable of. It's my job to come alongside them and help them put the things in place and take the action steps to get where they want to go. So, again, that concept of coaches in terms of sports, it's always interesting because, again, this is Culture Matters. And that culture, the coach has a plan. The coach has a strategy, and he goes and picks people and inserts them into that strategy and tries to raise them up to the standard that he wants in terms of that strategy. That's not what I do. Now, for the record, some coaching programs do that. They have their strategy. They have their playbook. They have the things they want you to run and make you conform to their strategy. It's not what I do. What I do is help people.
Go ahead. Sorry,
no, please.
I'm excited.
Well, I think what I do is I help people take all the knowledge and skills that they have and wrap it around their talent and create a strategy that's going to work for them. The strategy that I executed on in a specific way may not be the same version for them. They may have a different audience. They may have a different team of people around them, and on and on and on. So it is weird for me to call it a coach because I don't know that's exactly what I do, but until I can create a word that people understand, we're gonna run with that for now.
That's a deep thought, because I have a question. When you said the role of the sport, please understand that I didn't experience the sports really. But you're saying, like, as a human, you're saying plan, strategize, and insert people in that definition. That made me think of like a CEO or a manager. And so is part of this, and whereas you're coming in as a guide, as an advisor or counsel, well, do you think part of this is just the confusion in the culture of development of, I don't know what to call it. There's confusion
in performance coaching and self-improvement and business growth. Yes. I think in that culture, especially in the industry that I come from, which is largely in financial services, mortgage, real estate, those types of things, most paid coaches, a lot of times people will go to them for strategies, the 7 steps to success. And here's the shiny object that you need to adopt in your business. And that's, people think they want tactics. And it's easy to sell tactics because that's what people think they want. My experience is most professionals know what to do. They're just not doing it for some reason. And it's my job to help them figure out, why is it that you're in this industry? Why do you do what you do? Your why comes from your past. And then use that to create kind of a unique value offer, a unique business model where they're the uniqueness. Other people may be able to do the same type of thing, but how they deliver it and show up. It's also to help them identify their North Star. What is it that they're trying to accomplish from this, both personally and professionally? And then once we've got these foundations, Then we start building the tactics and the strategy on top of it, because if we don't have that first lens of why you do what you're doing, what your uniqueness in the marketplace is, and where it is you're going, those tactics are going to fall short. They're in vain, because you're just out doing a lot of things. And, there's the quote, if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time. And I think that's what a lot of people do.
I don't know why, but this just popped into my mind. Being in nothingness, it's like tough. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. Whoa, right. What a statement. Where'd you come up with that?
It's a famous quote out there. If you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. It's like John Maxwell or Zig Ziglar or something.
What's the morale right now, and how are some ways that we can guarantee failure right now?
Say that one more time. What's the morale around failure?
No, what's the morale right now in business? And how can we guarantee failure?
Ooh, the second part's quite a bit deeper question. The first part is the morale, unfortunately, is low. And it's interesting because we throw out some of the cliches, like some of the biggest businesses in the world were created during a recession, or we're creating during down times. And we say all this stuff, but 90+% of people are licking their wounds and doing nothing. Like right now I'm just coming off the end of conference season. For the last 2 or 3 months, I have attended events, spoken to groups of people and to companies all over the country. I mean, 8 or 10 cities.
Wow.
And as I talk to other leaders, high performers, or average folks, and everywhere in between, the commonality between everybody that's talking about someone who's really crushing it right now, there's really 2 things that they all had in common. And this plays into, as a side note, I'm finishing a book called What the Uncommon Have in Common. So this is always top of mind for me. But as I talk about these and just kind of listen and pay attention, the 2 things that people who are crushing it right now in business have is that they know exactly what they're trying to accomplish, and they're working their butt off. They're working like crazy. It's action, it's effort. And it's a very controlled effort. They know they're not just in motion, they're taking action, right? Motion doesn't deliver result. It's that busy versus productive situation. They're out there taking action toward a desired end that gets a result. And I think if people would pay more attention to the intentionality of the action steps they're taking, they're going to get further. And the last little piece to that is in this last event I was at last week. There's a guy named Sean Benosian who one of the last 2 years, he's one of the top originators in the entire country, like first or second. His closes over $1 billion a year in mortgage production. Anybody in the industry knows if you do $100 million in production, you're top 10, top 25 easy.
In the country.
Correct. $1 billion is crazy. He and I have become friendly and been around each other a few times. And we sat and we're talking, and a lot of people would come up and ask him questions. And a guy came up and asked the question about what he does every day. What does it take to close $1 billion in production? And I thought his answer was very interesting. He said, I come in at 8 o'clock and I leave at 5 o'clock every day. But I have a team of people, including myself, that make sure every minute, every hour of every day is productive, is toward something. And you think about it, I don't know that a lot of people could even imagine themselves just working 8 to 5 and doing that much business. But what he focuses on is what I call green time. If we time track and look at our calendar, you got red light, yellow light, green light. Green light are income producing activities that only you can do. Yellow light is either short-term or long-term income producing activities, but those can be delegated. And then red is, of course, you just need to get them off your calendar. You don't need to be doing it's dead time. You're wasting time. It's not moving the needle. Well, he just makes sure that 8 to 5 is all green, where most people think they're green time and they're probably yellow or red. And so that's an exercise that I do with my coaching clients is track everything you do in half-hour increments for 4 or 5 days, and then take some highlighters, or if you do it on Excel, fill those colors and see where you're spending your time. So it goes back to this thing where morale's low but people understand some of the biggest businesses in the world came out of times just like these, but yet we can't get ourselves to take action and go be one of those people.
So be unclear about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how
Be
I can do it.
clear.
Well, no, I'm saying if I want to be failure, the
Oh,
second
if you so
question,
what does it take to fail? Be
be
unclear.
unclear
Correct. Not
and
know
work,
where you're
find
going,
out.
why you're doing it, or whether or not the action that you're taking is going to get a result, or whether or not this action you're taking is productive. That's what it takes to fail, or not do anything at all.
The reason I pose it that way is Munger, when he was Charlie Munger, one of my idols, says invert, always invert. And so when he was hired in I think it was the Air Force or the Navy, something making sure fighter planes didn't crash, he tried to figure out how to crash them first.
Nice.
So I have a
That's
question about
super profound, by the way. I don't want us to skip right over that.
Oh,
That's
thanks.
something I will now use, because the way I interpret it is,
Little
if I
bobblehead.
asked someone, got your little Munger bobblehead
Charlie
there.
Munger bobblehead right there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is
Wow.
I think about that. If I ask someone to say, hey, what is your goal, or what is it that you think your goal is? What would it take to fail at that goal?
Mm.
And they list those things. All of a sudden, they're going to see parallels of what they're doing, because a lot of those actions that it takes to fail are probably, or lack of action is what they're doing. And so all of a sudden it highlights that red, yellow light, green light in a different way of, what does it take to fail at that? If you knew for sure you're going to fail, what would that look like? And then I think it's easier for them to do. So, man, I love that inverse approach.
As a lifelong learner yourself and a teacher, I'm just off the cuff curious about, what do you ever think about how connected we really are? It's like I'm imparting something I got from Munger, and now we're philosophizing around it. I don't know, like how do you see the importance of constantly learning? I guess is a question in there.
It's the most important thing. It's for
Why?
me personally. And so when I talk about whether it's coaching, consulting, or even just mentoring people, you have to take the goals or the things you want to accomplish in your life and business and kind of reverse engineer that into milestones until you kind of find that first step, because that first step is believable for people. And we build daily habits around them. But what I challenge people to do is, if you think about your North Star in terms of who's the ideal version of you, this high performing, perfect version of you, what do they look like? What do they think about? What do they talk about? What are the relationships with the people around them? What does their business look like? What are their hobbies? All those things. You end up with about 5 buckets: spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, and financial. And from those buckets, you can then create some of those really big goals. And if you just take an individual goal, I use an easy example. If someone wanted to be a published author and write a book, well, what's the step right before a published book? Well, a manuscript. And the step right before that's probably an outline. The step right before that's a bunch of written content that's in categories. Step right before that's a bunch of written content. Step before that's just some written content. Okay, now great. That's a first step that someone can buy into, is I'm now going to create a daily habit that I'm going to journal or blog or write a little bit every day. After a few months, you now are that first step and you can change that habit. What I challenge people to do is, when they've created 2 or 3 habits in each one of those bigger buckets, find 3 or 4 that are non-negotiable, that are irrevocable promises to self, so that no matter what happens, even if you don't get to all your daily habits, your day went sideways, you're traveling, whatever, you know that every single day there's 3 or 4 things that are moving the needle to that North Star. It creates belief. For me, one of my non-negotiables is at least 60 minutes a day I learn. Wow. Whether that's a podcast, Audible, reading books, masterminding, and it's typically much more than that, but that's one of my non-negotiables, is to learn. Because I think that in a position as someone who does coach and speak and teach, I have to fill that fuel tank back up. I have to think of new ways to reach people and understand their personality types. And if I listen and learn from other people, the underlying principle or concept may be the same as something that I know, but just like your inverse, it's the same underlying principle, but how I frame it for someone else may be all the difference in the world of them catching it. But if we're not trying to go and learn and we're just regurgitating the same things over and over, we lose an opportunity to accomplish what it is we're trying to do, which is to help people. And so for me, learning is one of the most important things. That's one of the things in my book about what the uncommon have in common is they're lifelong learners, period. No really successful person, and not just monetarily, has success in all the areas of life. There's not one of them that isn't continually growing and learning and feeding their mind.
When you're putting this book together, what's been your process? Have you interviewed people? Because you have the podcast, of course,
right,
and have had it for years. Met with people. What's been your process?
Great question. It's the first part. The way it happened was having interviewed hundreds of people and having been interviewed on probably another 100 and 150 podcasts, masterminding with people, having great coaches and mentors and coaching other people, is I was trying to kind of unpack. I have a friend and a mentor, and we will have these conversations around how do we get the best out of people? Is it something that's these characteristics are God-given? Or are you born with them naturally? Are they learned? Is there's a process to teach them? You know, what are those things? And I think before you can answer that question, you have to figure out what are those things? What are the tangibles and intangibles that they have in common? And as I started thinking about what are the things that all of these people possess as far as personality traits or disciplines in their life or actions that they take. And it started with just a random list of things that I thought about. Then I started doing some research about what other people, published articles around what they saw that, executives and CEOs and entrepreneurs and coaches and people that have these incredible family lives or lifestyle brands. And that list had a ton of overlap. And then it was kind of to develop, okay, here's the categories, if you will. And then I'm in the process now of breaking them up into habits versus mindset versus skill versus natural, kind of breaking them up and figuring out what's going to be the flow of the book, what's the sections and how does it need to unpack and unfold. Because when I sit here and say the commonality with all people that are succeeding in business right now is taking action, that doesn't mean that all the action is the same. So it's turned into a much deeper project. And I'm trying to figure out now, maybe this should be a series of books. And I've not said this publicly before. Instead of one big book, is this of what the uncommon have in common in terms of mindset, in terms of habits, in terms of traits? Like, is it a series where people kind of pick the category that they want to know about? Or, is this a chicken soup for the soul where you apply it to different, this is what the uncommon have in common business and in families? Like, is there a bigger thing here that I can lay the foundation?
I want to know what successful psychopathic leaders do.
Right. Exactly. Right. So again,
not really.
It's a thing. It's a rabbit hole that can go down. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And again, it's fun for me because I don't think that it is this, you're either born with it or you're not. I think some people have natural talents that predispose them to naturally acquire some of these characteristics and traits versus others may have to work a little harder. But, what I'm trying to accomplish from the book is to kind of give people those success principles that are uniform. And then they now have the option. Once you remove someone's illusions, they can't have those illusions back anymore. When you learn a magic trick and how it's done, you no longer look at that illusion or magic trick the same way. And that's what I want to do for people is I think we put, business leaders or successful people or celebrities on a pedestal as if they're created differently or they had some secret. And most of the time they just understood a few things and they just kept doing it over and over and over.
What have you learned about yourself putting this together?
What I've learned, that's a great question too. What I've learned is that because I've had so many people in my life that have sewed into me, there were a lot of things that I feel like I viscerally understood that now I can not academically in a pure sense, but I can more academically explain. I knew that to change my mood, to change my attitude, I needed to go for a walk. I needed to go do some breathing. I needed to bust out a workout. And I'd been taught these things. Like we get taught these hacks. If you're under a lot of stress, right, to go from system 1 to system 2, from fight or flight to your conscious mind, box breathing. Part of that is oxygen in the blood. That oxygenated blood goes to the brain. That brain releases endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, and that changes our mood. And so through this exercise of understanding why this stuff works, I've been able to figure out, oh, okay, I've seen that work and kind of understood it, but now I can break it down and make it practical for people.
For those that are skeptical of opening themselves up to counsel, to a guide, a steward of their truth, per se, what's the strong man argument to that position? I'm already doing example. I'm doing $1 billion. I'm in at 8 and I leave at 5. And what are you gonna, how are you gonna help me? Just giving that example.
Sure.
What's the strong man argument for that external guide that's going to ask the questions and be that relationship, be that person?
I think it's that we're expanding beings, and I think we put what we're capable of or what we can achieve in a box. And again, it always goes to the tangible and financial side, but I'm talking about even mentally. How do we know what we can learn, what we can comprehend, what we can think about and talk about unless we put ourselves in a position to do that? There's always another level. There's always a next step. Saw a guy on YouTube the other day, excuse me, he's very successful in the real estate space. And he said, I'm not trying to be a billionaire, I'm trying to be a trillionaire. I think I've got the plan and strategy of how I'm going to become a billionaire, but I need to aim to be a trillionaire because that's what's going to keep me growing and evolving. Because I don't know how that's going to work yet because no one's done that before. There's no path to that, but it is possible. And I think people said that about being a billionaire whenever millionaire was the milestone, right? For me, I'll have people I'll talk to that says, hey, listen, maybe they're in the mortgage space. I already have 50 really solid referral partners. I've got thousands of people in my database. I don't need to be on social media. I don't need to create a personal brand. My response to them is, it's so awesome that you've got those pieces because that's what so many people aspire to. But I think we can increase your conversion and get you more results with the same amount of work or the same results with less work just because of having the exposure and making it easier for those people to refer you. Because on a very practical level, when was the last time any of us saw a movie that was referred to us or bought a product or went to a restaurant that someone said you need to go there that we didn't go online and kick the tires first? So someone that has that successful of a business, but they have no presence online, showing them how to have a presence online is going to increase their conversion, which creates the efficiency. So there's always another level. So, with Sean Benosian, well, what can you do for me? I'm already doing $1 billion. I'm already the top one. Okay, well, maybe because he's achieved a lot of those things, maybe it's a legacy play. Okay, great. You can do it. Can you package that and show other people how to do it? Can you conceptualize and create a playbook that other people could potentially follow? There's always something next. Doesn't mean people have to want the next thing. That's part of what I do, is try to figure out what's going to drive people. How do they create a burn to want more? Doesn't mean you're not grateful for what you have or happy for what you have. But I personally believe we are expanding beings and we're supposed to grow. We're supposed to evolve. We're supposed to test limits and, break the barrier. And typically it only takes one person to do it. I mean, Roger Bannister in the 4-minute mile is the easiest example that we could use. They said, physiologically, this was impossible. The human body can't move that fast. And then after he did it, like a dozen people did it the next 24 months, right? It's a mental thing. And we have to continue to push that, which goes back to what you said earlier. If we're not continuing to learn, how do we know what the limit is?
this travel and speaking and um first of all, how did you get to the point where you were speaking and people cared what you had to say?
I had massive imposter syndrome the first few times because the original kind of personal brand, if you will, that I had built was around having a podcast where I had highly influential people that came and spoke on my podcast, and I got to ask questions. And so I put a microphone in front of someone else that had really cool stuff to say. And at some point in time, people are like, well, hey, we want you to come and speak. And I remember thinking, why? All I did was put a microphone in front of someone else. What do I have to say? Then I had to realize there weren't a lot of people that got to sit and talk to these people and ask these questions. And I tell people a lot, listen, when you're listening to podcasts or going to events or reading books, it's a buffet. Take what you can use and leave the rest. If you can walk away with a couple of ideas or a couple of action items that you have enriched your life, that have made you a little smarter or something, that's a success. That's a win. And you may go read that book at a different season of life and it means something different and you catch something different.
The first, for those that want to speak, that are listening,
Yeah.
they want to be in a position where their voice matters, that has significance.
Mm-hmm.
How would one go about doing that and not? I just had a picture of like urinating in public, or like pooping their pants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like standing on stage for the first time. Because I think your vulnerability, like, your honesty, you're a very good speaker. So your honesty, I think that's helpful to people, because I can't imagine. You hear imposter syndrome all the time, right?
Yeah.
So what's your counsel to someone listening to this that desires to be in that position, or has been asked to be in that position and is unsure of how to?
My first thing is that if people are uncomfortable speaking and don't want to speak, don't force yourself to speak. There's plenty of other mediums that you can reach people outside of standing on a stage in front of a captive audience. But if you do have a desire to do that, or, yeah, I'm scared to death of doing it, but I want to do it, it's not as difficult as you think. You just have to start realizing that if someone invites you to speak on a panel or speak in front of the stage, it's because they believe you have something to say. So what is it you're passionate about? That if you were having a conversation with friends in a comfortable environment and they said, hey, just talk to me for a little bit about something you're excited about or something you're comfortable talking about or a lot about, and you were just going to start talking, that's probably a great area to start. That's a natural talent. Start adding some skill around it. How can I add some stats that are kind of proof of concept that show my credibility? How can I take this concept and use it to solve someone's problem so that I can add value there? And just kind of dial it in and make that your kind of go-to. And then as you reach out to people or people reach out to you, say, hey, listen, I really like talking about and feel qualified about talking about this. Because then when you get up there, you're more comfortable because it's material. That's my version. The version that I learned from one of my best friends and mentor is Rene Rodriguez.
Yeah, and he's great. He's been on the show.
Renee's a rock star, and just got to spend a few hours with him. We both spoke at the same event last week or this week, and he and I have spent a ton of time together. And through his program, he talks about communication and influence. And one of the early speaking on stage that I did, I had the stereotypical slides with bullet points. And I kind of read the slide and I would say a few words and read the slide and say a few words. And I'll never forget, it was the Iowa Housing Authority, and they were looking for someone to talk about mortgage marketing. So they Googled mortgage marketing experts. Wow. Well, Mortgage Marketing Expert is the name of my podcast because I brought experts on.
Pretty good.
And they saw that I was a speaker. They said, would you come and speak? I said, absolutely. I went, and when I got there, the housing event was a football theme. And it was me, Darren Woodson, who was an ESPN commentator, Hall of Famer, Dallas Cowboy, and then Rudy Rudiger, the real guy from the movie Rudy. And so there's this huge stage, all these people, and I was kind of leading up to these guys. So people were taking pictures and posting them online on social media. One of them had my slides with bullet points. And Renee takes a screenshot and circles it and goes, "What the heck is this? Like bullet points?" And he taught me that you don't have to memorize your memories. You already know them. So he teaches a concept of a frame, a message, and then a tie down. And what my slides are now, if I use slides, the slide is a picture. That picture will remind me of a story. I'm able to speak that story that leads me to a concept or a message. And then the tie down is really either a call to action, a challenge, or why they care. Why does that mean something to them? So my talks now are a series of frames, messages, and tie downs. And it makes it very easy because when you get up in front of talk in front of people and you're telling a story, that story will in turn make you more comfortable. People don't know that story. Even if you quote screwed the story up, no one knows that you messed up the story. And it just creates a more comfortable place. So that's my advice to people that aspire to want to speak or get paid to speak, is first find something you're comfortable with, that you know something about. And then as you structure your talks, tell stories that lead to the points and the value that you want to create. And it's so much easier to get up in front and talk in front of folks.
Would you recommend his gathering?
Absolutely. Amplify. Yeah. So he does Amplify. He normally caps it to about 10 people. It's a couple of day workshop. It's a higher price point. I've fortunately gotten to go to about 5 of them. I learn something every time, consume a lot of his content. He's one of the best in the space, and he's now helping really big celebrities and business people kind of craft their message. It's what he's known for, and has turned into a national figure at helping these people that normally just got up there and told how they did what they did, and maybe people to really craft a message. And one of the things he says is you have to let your heart speak in sequence. Tell the story. You don't have to memorize your memories. Tell stories that relates to people, because that's what opens their mind anyway. We don't want to listen to facts and figures and bullet points, but we'll catch the facts and figures and bullet points when it's framed with a story that made them feel something.
Yeah. How important is that now? Because of social, you think, to not be contrived and redundant in one's oratory?
Yeah, for sure. I think very much so. I also think that content on social media is different. Like, obviously short form video, TikToks, Reels, things, those are extremely popular, 30, 45 seconds. That's a passive audience where people are scrolling by. So with a passive audience, you have to give them the goods up front. You have to give them a hook. This is what I'm getting ready to talk about. This is the value that you need to know. And so that one is a hook. Identify the problem and give them a solution in a very short period of time. When you're speaking in front of people, since it's a captive audience, they're there to listen. You can build it up and you can save the good stuff for that tie down, for that bullet point. That's going to be different. So I think a lot of people that are naturally good speakers have a challenge on social media, and people that are really good with social media a lot of times end up not making great speakers because it's two different muscles.
What about being dynamic? This is great. This is like a master class. So how would we want to go about doing both? Does that bring us back to the learning?
I think so. Even Renee's got like 1 million followers on TikTok now and hundreds of thousands on Instagram. But he, self-professed, really struggled early on, a few years ago with social media, because he was just taking what he thought were really good segments of his talks and posting them.
Yeah.
But if you don't capture people in the first few seconds, they're going to scroll by. And there's a really good book by Brendan Kane called Hook Point. And it's a follow-up to his first book called 1 Million Followers. And he went from 0 to 1 million followers on Instagram in, I think, 30 days, just to prove that it could be done. And then he talks about Hook Point, which is, you only have a few seconds. And so, again, I think that there's some great resources out there. But no, being dynamic is the right thing. We'll use Renee as the example. What he's done now is he'll take maybe some of these short segments of his talk, 30, 45 seconds, but he'll pre-record a frame on the front of it, give them the goods, and then there's the other talk. Or it's just changing the order of what you're talking about. So the thought of being dynamic is crucial. If you're wanting to create a brand and create awareness on social, that's not the same thing that's going to make you a good speaker. And just being a good speaker may not get you as many opportunities if you're not visible on social. It's something that I've struggled with because frankly, I'm kind of in the middle. I was never naturally a great speaker. I was never really dynamic on social media. So I've had to work both muscles in opposite directions. And we're starting to get a feel for it. And you also have to realize you're not going to be able to do everything yourself. So you do have to reach out to other people and learn. You do have to hire teams of people and contract with folks that is in their natural skill set. But in terms of even short and long form content, I'm not necessarily trying to go too deep on social media other than to illustrate the point. The team that helps me with my podcast is not the same team that's editing out my short form content, and is a completely different team that's helping me on YouTube. And those are teams I've just hired within the last couple of months, because those are 3 different strategies, because the content style is different things. And then you've got Renee that helps me with, speaking. So you've got 4 buckets that are all going to create lift, but you've got to find experts in that specific thing to be well-rounded.
What did you learn being on this tour of what's this current state of things and how we can succeed and win?
I think it's similar to what we talked about a second ago. The sentiment out there and the morale isn't good, but people like to talk about the negative stuff more than the positive stuff. And it's kind of like the really horrible, mainstream media line of, if it bleeds, it leads. Right. I think when you start talking to people at these events, they will lead with that because they think that that's what we're supposed to do. The irony of that is, again, I go back to social media because it shows us human behavior. We all know that video is the most engaged type of content on social media, but gratitude videos is the segment of video that does the best. And gratitude can be just saying something positive. Like, I'm so glad it's the high is 80 here in Dallas today, because there for 6 weeks, it was like 107. And I'm just glad it's a pretty day. I hope you guys are outside enjoying your day. Or listen, Jay Duran has an incredible podcast, Culture Matters. You need to listen. I'm super fortunate that I got to be a guest today. In addition to that, he's brought me on a couple of times, and I'm just super grateful for that. He's a good dude. He's always learning. He expands my mind. You guys should check it out. Gratitude videos are engaged at a high level for 2 reasons. One, there's so much negative crap that when we see it, we're drawn to it. The second thing is gratitude portrays abundance, and abundance portrays success. And people want to see more from someone that they viscerally feel like is successful. So if someone just goes out and starts talking about things that they're grateful for, things that are positive in their life, it's difficult to do that from a mindset perspective if you don't have a level of abundance there. And again, stereotypical, like way back in the day, really overweight fat people were rich people because they had enough to eat, right?
Yeah.
So subconsciously, we see abundance as success. That's why they're engaged at a high level. And so at these events, people lead with that, when ironically, if you started saying, listen, man, there's a lot of challenges in the markets, but what I see is opportunity. I see all kinds of opportunities to change people's narratives, to talk about something different than we've always been talking about, to create a strategy to solve problems for people. And that's going to lead to all these other things we want. They would have people rallying around them, wanting to talk about what they know, because we are drawn to that as opposed to the negative crap. And I just think that a lot of times too, depending on the event, because this isn't a blanket statement, but some of the events, the people that are there, they're not doing any business and they're trying to find a nugget to help. So they're just walking around talking to other people that aren't doing any business, that are struggling. And that turns into the narrative.
What do you think about how podcasting is evolving?
I think it's still early.
What do you, yeah, can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So there's a guy named Ryan Pineda that has a podcast that does a ton on, what's that? Yes.
Good hair.
Yes. Always has crazy color hair. He's in the real estate space, used to be a professional baseball player. And people always commented about his hair. And so he dyed it blonde one time, and that what people knew him for. Now he just does these crazy color hair. He's had a podcast and he's taken it to a really high level, brought on a lot of really influential, business professionals and celebrities. Also has done very well in short form content, but he's friends with the guys who have the Bigger Pockets podcast. And the Bigger Pockets podcast, for those that don't know, Bigger Pockets is it started as kind of a blog and an investment, for people that want to invest in real estate. It's got a ton of resources. And those guys started their podcast 11 years ago, and they thought they were late. And even now, when people ask, we should have jumped on TikTok in 2019 or 2020, and a guy got at an event where he was speaking a few weeks ago, a guy got up and asked the question, TikTok was 4 years ago. What's the next wave that we should all be trying to catch? And with a straight face, he sat there and said, podcasting. He said, it's still very early. If you go look at podcast stats, and I do it as well, if someone went and Googled podcast stats 2023 or 2022, you'll see that there's between 2 and 3 million podcasts on Apple, which is typically one of the bigger platforms, that and Spotify. 2 or 3 million podcasts on there, but there's only a few 100,000, maybe 400,000 or 500,000, 300,000 that have posted an episode in the last month.
Really?
And whenever you also look at the behaviors of podcasting, there's still a small number of people that listen to podcasts regularly, meaning once a month, once a week, whatever. But the people that do, on average, listen to about 7. So when you're saying we think that there's a ton of podcasts, but there's not that many podcasts that are continuing to put out episodes, number one. Number two, there's still only a small percentage of the population that regularly listen. And the ones that regularly listen, they don't listen to just one. They listen to multiple. When you literally look at the numbers behind it, there is still a huge opportunity. And because of the on-demand type services of, Netflix and Prime and Hulu and everything, we're used to wanting to go grab content on demand. Radio isn't on demand anymore. They're trying to stay relevant by using some of these other platforms. So podcasting plays into the bigger behavior and how we consume content. And I think that because you can get so niche and talk about really granular topics, and you don't have to have a huge audience. I mean, if you had a couple of hundred people that listened regularly, you're going to have a very, very successful podcast. You could talk about, this is actually a guy told me about this. He was in the mortgage space in the Northwest, and his biggest hobby was playing adult co-ed sports, like co-ed softball, co-ed kickball, things like that. They started a podcast that blew up in that space, and his business exploded because it just exposed him to more people. The more hands you shake, the more money you make. And he just went and started a podcast about something he was passionate about. Ironically, the first podcast I ever listened to was a home brewing podcast because I was trying to build a brewery. I hadn't listened to many podcasts when I launched mine. I think people need to realize that the power of podcasting is you can do other things while you listen. You're in the car, you're at home, you're at the gym.
How many people listen to them? Like, do you know those stats? Like how many?
I think the average downloads per episode is 1,000.
The average downloads per episode.
I can even look it up real quick.
Yeah, I'm really, it's funny because
actually
you're just a wealth of knowledge. I should know all these things, but I get the opportunity to pick your brain. You're an expert.
It's actually come down substantially. I just Googled it while we're sitting here talking, and it says a podcast episode that has been live for approximately 30 days averages 141 downloads. If you have
part of that is attributed to even since the last time you looked at the data, so many more podcasts would have been created.
Correct. And again, I would also think that there's a lot of podcasts that say I want to start a podcast, but don't understand that you probably need to commit that I'm going to put out an episode a week or a couple episodes a month for 2 years without stopping. Like starting a podcast isn't a short-term thing. You got to ride the waves. You're on a high because you started it, but people aren't necessarily listening at the level you
I
want.
wonder what percentage of the population are listening to it at this juncture, and like how much, what are.
So
I
the
think
second part of
yeah,
this, to give you some context, this says right here, if you have 3,400 downloads on an episode, you're in the top 10% of all podcasts out there.
3,400 on one episode, top 10% in a
of
whole
everything.
thing.
Yeah.
That seems pretty inspiring.
Yes.
So that makes me agree that it sounds early.
Yeah.
Because it's either early or it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, and it clearly is making sense for people.
So here's the other part of the data. In 2022, 38% of the US population said they listened to a podcast in the last month.
Wow.
Which is 3 times, it's 3x what it was 10 years ago. Wow. So again, there's this concept of critical mass, that when something reaches about 10% of the population, it goes from 10% of the population to 50, 60, 70% of the population in a much shorter period of time than it took to get to that critical mass. I think we're at the beginning stages of that kind of hockey stick. Like if in your normal bell curve, you've got your, innovators, your early adopters, early majority, late majority, whatever. I think we're still in the early adopter, almost early majority stage, because 38% of people that listened in the last month, there's people that, okay, I listen to podcasts in terms of someone sent me an episode to listen to. I don't know, again, because I'm not looking at the entire facts and figure sheet, but I would say that it's probably half that listen every single month or closer to weekly. Like for me, I listen to podcasts almost daily, and not just because I'm a podcaster. It's an easy way for me to consume a lot of different types of content. And I say that to say, I think that that's why people really need that. That doesn't mean they have to go out and start a podcast, but they need to understand the power of what it can do.
Do you listen, if you listen to a podcast, do you listen to all the episodes?
It depends on the podcast.
What about the ones that are you're most involved in? You go out of your way to listen to all of them?
Most of the time. Like if it's a podcast that I'm really into, yes, I'll listen to all of them. There's some podcasts where I'll kind of look and see which ones may jump out at me. But I also think too that if you listen to an episode that you knew you were going to like or thought you were going to like and did, a lot of times you'll listen to 2 or 3 more, even if you're not sure if you would like them. And that's why people need to understand that we also, back in the day, if you loved a TV show, you had to wait a week for the next episode to come out. Where now you can binge watch a whole season or multiple seasons or multiple episodes in a short period of time. The same behavior will happen in podcasts. So sometimes you only need like 1 or 2 really big episodes of a cool topic or a cool guest to get people to want to go sample and listen to the rest of your content. If it's solid content, then that's fine. And you've got to level up your game. You're one of the best at asking really good questions. Every time I'm on here, you ask questions that no one else has asked. And I don't mean that in flatter. I mean that is that's why your show is such a good show, is there's a different level of content there where again, I've done dozens and into the hundreds of other shows, and I would say that 75% of them, I'm asked the same types of questions on there. Yeah, because they want to know about me and what I do and how I do what I do and those types of things, where you may ask the initial question, but you want to take it 3 or 4 layers deeper because you're wanting to get to the culture and the mind part of it. And I think that's really what we all kind of want to listen to.
Our average listening time is beyond 90%. Do you think there's a causal relationship there?
Yeah. So Edison Research this is a few years old, but Edison Research did a study and said that 92% of people listen to most or all of a podcast episode that they start. And I have a chart of it, and it's broken up into 4 sections: just the beginning, less than half, more than half, or all of it. And if you add the more than half and all of it, 92% of people listen to most or all. Now, the reason that's significant is, again, I haven't Googled it in a few months, but for a while, the average podcast episode length is around 40 minutes. So if you have a podcast, you have a 92% chance of people being there for 20 minutes or more. It's a very high trust audience. So people will say, well, if I put a video on social media and get 141 views, that sucks. Well, maybe, but they're also consuming 10,000 videos. Where if you have 141 people, 92% of those, so, what's the math on that? 130, 125, listen for at least 20 of your 40 minutes. That's a lot of branding. That's a lot of exposure. That's a lot of education. So in terms of brand, whether you're a corporate brand, whether you're a personal brand, whether you're an educator, I don't mean brand in terms of business. I'm talking about exposure and attention. Podcasting is one of the best ways to do it. So the fact that you've got that high of a listening time, especially because you have a little longer podcast, is a big deal.
The average episode's longer than 40 for sure.
Yeah.
I have to go dig through the data again, and this is a timely conversation. We've got to reanalyze, reassess. But I've been of the speculation that they'd be tied based on the intention that's been put into the quality. Right. I look at each one of these like a work of art.
Yeah,
it's going to look
the right intention to have.
What'd you say?
I said that's, in my opinion, the right intention to have. Because I've never been a phenomenal host. I've just been an inquisitive person. I liked to ask questions I thought people would want to listen to. Since then, I've continued to try to get better at hosting in terms of creating a platform and edifying this person that I'm bringing on. Again, my podcast is called Mortgage Marketing Expert. As I go into the business of success, these are people that have businesses, have success, and have things to learn. Then I want to try to ask them something that people couldn't just go to their Instagram page or their YouTube channel or their podcast and find the answer to. What's something different? And I'll throw in some interesting episodes. One of the guys I had on he spent, 10 years plus, 12, 13 years in prison. He had one of the biggest mortgage frauds coming out of the crisis. And I wanted to ask him, what did he learn from that? What was the decision that took him from, okay, I'm playing in the gray area, to I'm crossing legal, ethical, lines here? What was his take on it? And it was interesting because, not that I was trying to prevent people from committing mortgage fraud, but what his takeaway was is he goes, do you know how good everyone has it out here? Like the food, like something as simple as the food we eat every day. He goes, the food in prison's terrible. And he goes, you have this phone that you can watch hours and hours of anything you want for free on a phone that you walk around with. And what I was trying to tie that to is that gratitude piece. We spend so much time talking about our business isn't doing enough revenue, we're not making enough money, and we miss that this is one of the most incredible times ever to be alive, in spite of all the problems, in spite of all the crap we know is there, and everything we're doing wrong as humanity. Even right now, there's timely stuff where one country's attacking another one because of an ideal. That's been that way since humans were on the earth. We attack someone because of they think differently, look differently, whatever. But there's another side to this, to where if we have conversations and can change someone's perspective a little bit, that allows them to relate to another person a little bit. I don't know, maybe I'm being idealistic, but isn't that how we change things? Isn't that how we change the world? Is try to get people to understand that just because I believe a certain way, think something different, or am different, doesn't mean I'm attacking you. Right. I don't know if it's been said, Aristotle didn't say this, but he's been attributed this quote forever, which is the mark of a truly educated mind is to contemplate a thought without accepting it as your own. And I know that that's not the literal version, but I'm going to give him credit for saying that, whatever. I think that that's what our country was founded on and what most people believe. But we've come to this place to where if I don't believe the same way you do, that's an attack on me, and we're different in that way. So if I can have conversations that, maybe you're a tangent from business, or have conversations that are different from other people, and realize we do have things in common, all of a sudden that makes us all more similar, because most of us really are. right? Seth Godin wrote an incredible book called Tribes. We're all part of tribes and our hobbies and where we're from and what we like and what we do. And that's how you build trust with people, is show that you're like them, that you have things in common with them. We naturally are drawn to people and trust people that we think we have things in common with.
You think more inclusive people are attracted to podcasting?
It's a great question. I would say I don't have any evidence to back this up, but just again, viscerally, I would say yes.
Like the podcasting culture, what is it at this stage in its infancy?
The podcasting culture is a very inclusive culture. I have people all the time that, will offer me to be on their podcast, and I'm very quick to reciprocate. I also, even within a specific niche and industry, there's other podcasts that have very similar names to my name and mine theirs. But what we understand is through these stats, they're not mutually exclusive. The person that may want to listen to my podcast may want to listen to their podcast and get something completely different. And they're not going to stop listening to me, more than likely, to listen to someone else or vice versa. And so it becomes very inclusive. And other verticals in business that are like that, one's like, craft beer. People that love craft beer drink a lot of different kinds of craft beer. They may be a little more loyal to one brand or another, but it's craft beer against big beer, right? Or indie cosmetics. It's us against the world. They're very inclusive and collaborative. When I opened my brewery years ago, we ran out of kegs. And I called one of the other breweries across town. Not only did he let me borrow some kegs for a while, he had his guys load them up on the truck and bring them to me. Like we've traded grain. And when you're talking about inclusivity, there are some people that are going to say, I'm going to start a podcast for the purposes of being exclusive or to promote an ideal that is the opposite of that. But by and large, one of the reasons I love podcasting is if you love podcasting, you love that other people are doing podcasting. No exaggeration. I've probably had 100 conversations with people to help them start or better their podcast on just anecdotal things I've learned along the way. I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination, but over 5.5 years, you pick up a few things.
Have you been to any podcasting events specific?
No, there are a few out there. I haven't been to any. I have consumed a lot of some online courses and YouTube videos and things like that. Whenever there was a social media app called Clubhouse, it's still around. It would kind of blew up there for a while. I spent some time in there. A lot of them, the rooms that I moderated or spoke in, were podcasting within the industries that I've done business in, mortgage and real estate, financial services. And I decided one day that I was going to go and get in just generic podcasting rooms. And one of the guys that was speaking used to be high up an executive within Apple Podcast. And he just recently switched. He worked for a company that did story form podcasts with voice actors. And I remember like Matthew McConaughey and Meg Ryan and really big A-list celebrities. And I went up, the way you go up in Clubhouse, you raise your hand, they bring you up and you ask a question. I said, hey, listen, I feel like I understand how to build an audience, build a podcast within my industry, but just a random podcast that's just trying to reach the average listener or consumer, how do they grow? What do they tactically need to do? Well, anybody that used Clubhouse, you could only attach Twitter. It wasn't really a chat feature. They had Twitter and I think Instagram. He went to my Twitter and he said, I see your podcast. I see you've had, Gary Vaynerchuk on, you've had Ryan Serhant, you've had a few of these people, and there's some cool things. I see a lot of features about your podcast, but I don't necessarily see a benefit of why I would listen. And I thought that was pretty profound. And I think a lot of people want to list off the features of things. We do that in business, but sometimes we don't articulate the benefit of how that helps someone, why they care, or how that solves a problem for them. And I think that that's really what, again, for sure in podcasting, but a lot of other ways, if we'll sit and realize there should be a benefit for people, there should be a solution and a piece of value, that's what's going to stack growth.
You think it makes sense for me to start going to some of these podcast events?
I think so. My experience has been some of the podcasting events, at least from what I see and like looking at the agendas, a lot of them teach about monetization. A lot of them teach about the tactical things of how to record and how to edit, how to scale, how to put it on different platforms, some of the technology things behind it. I didn't, and not that there wasn't, I just didn't, in the quick glance, because one's called Podfest. It's by far the biggest. And I
Is
do
it
want to go at some point in
Podfest?
time, called Podfest. And I do want to go at some point in time, but I don't know that they're having these types of conversations. They have a lot of data. They talk about how it's growing and definitely some reasons why people should want to be in podcasting. But I don't know how many of them are talking about conversation development, hosting. And again, there's probably some of
Maybe that's
those
going to be
breakout
us.
sessions. Maybe that's it.
I just feel like I'm doing this thing, right? And then I ask, what am I doing? Right? Meaning I get a lot out of it, having to
Yeah.
lean in and learn Phil more deeply and learn from you and whomever the guest is. But like, what's going on out there? What's the culture like in this industry? Is it an industry? And
It's definitely an
ultimately,
industry.
and it's blossoming, it sounds like.
Yeah. And so here's an interesting thing for me. When I started a podcast, I didn't expect people to listen because I knew it was earlier in podcasting. I didn't know a lot of people who listened to them, but I for sure didn't think people would listen within my industry. The reason I did it was I had an Instagram page. And if you think circa 2017, 18 Instagram, it was quote of the day, pick of the day, tip of the day. So I started a mortgage marketing expert Instagram page to do a mortgage marketing tip of the day. After 30 days, we had about 1,000 followers. It grew very quickly. And within 90 days, I started running out of stuff to say. There was only so many one-liners I could come up with. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast, bring on experts. I'll use their quotes to feed this Instagram page. I was repurposing content, but that really wasn't a conversation people were having back then.
Mm.
But what I knew is two things. These were people that I wanted to get to know. And if I got to have a 30, 45-minute conversation with them, I was going to be able to create relationship within my industry. The second thing I knew is that these people typically charge thousands of dollars a month for their time and coaching and whatever. And I got them for a half an hour to ask them any question that I wanted. I was learning. So I didn't really care whether people listened or not because I knew what I was getting out of it. And so there was some unintended consequences or benefits that came out of it. One of which, when I put out the episode, they shared it to their audience. And then their audience saw me as a contemporary, and some of them would follow. And my brand and following grew because of these other people. And these people that were guests that were titans of industry started becoming friends and mentors. And like, I can think of, probably 24 people that I only saw from stage. That was my exposure to them, that are now people I talk to regularly, that know my family and I know theirs, that I, am friends with them. And if people took that concept and talked about what they could do in their community, maybe they love to travel. Great. Go create a podcast for your community and go to all the restaurants and the bars and the resorts and the hotels, the mayor, the chamber. And first of all, a lot of these people have never been asked to be on a podcast before. So they're going to jump at the chance to. You now create some really key relationships within your own community. And anyone that's looking to move there or travel there is probably going to listen, especially if you're putting some content on social, putting on YouTube that it's easy to find and search. A lot of times we think that the podcast has to be about the business that we're in or the industry that we're in, and it has to be about that business. Well, frankly, that's boring. Would you go listen to a podcast about, financial services products? No. But you might listen to a podcast of millionaires and decamillionaires and how their journey over 20 or 30 years to become financially independent, what that was like. They may listen to, strategies around a certain thing. Like, again, I challenge people, if they're even a little bit interested in a podcast, to go search podcast stats 2022. A couple of other ones that I think are profound is the average income of a podcast listener is like $125,000.
Really?
Which is like what, 2x the median income in the United States. Another stat is that I think it's 75% of people bought a product or service that they learned about on a podcast. So you're saying 3/4 of people are patronizing businesses and service providers that they were exposed to either because the guest was on or there was a sponsorship or whatever. There's a lot of things about the demographics of podcast listeners that for most people are the people are trying to reach. And this isn't me having some, excuse me, this isn't me trying to have some exclusivity around a certain group of people. I'm just saying most of what I help people with is creating a podcast that creates exposure for business purposes. Well, if the people that are listening are buying products and services they learn about and have an income that they can spend on those products and services, that's a positive thing, right?
So are you making the judgment that someone with a business would benefit from that medium?
If they do it right, yes.
What are some ways to horribly do it? Let's invert.
I love that. I was hoping you would go there. The ways to horribly do it is have a podcast about your business and just talk about what the business does. Podcast should not be a commercial or an infomercial. They could talk about the stories of the clients that they serve and how what they did changed their life. They could talk about all the cool, again, no pun intended. They should talk about why culture matters in their business. They need to talk about what they do to contribute to the culture and community around them, or find something that is one step away. I'll give you an example. When I moved to Texas 6 years ago, there was a guy, I had this really cool covered back porch. I'm like, I want to do a fire pit, but I didn't know if I wanted to like buy one or build one. So I was just Googling around and I came across this page that was all these DIY projects, do it yourself. And one of the sections was fire pits. The guy had a whole YouTube channel. He may have had a podcast, but he had a ton of content around really cool DIY projects for homes. The guy was an insurance agent. Also, the irony wasn't lost on me that an insurance agent was teaching me how to build a fire pit in my house, but that's neither here nor there.
That's funny.
But it was interesting because the content was so good. Even though I had one of my best friends was an independent insurance agent, I actually tried to refer some business to this guy because I wanted to reciprocate the value that he provided. So think about your business. What is kind of one step to the side of it? Again, mortgage and real estate. If you had a podcast around the, personal finance things that we didn't learn in school and our parents didn't teach us, and maybe you have an episode on here are the 3 best budgeting apps coming up in 2024, or, here are some easy hacks to get started investing in real estate, and you add value of things that people want to know about. Don't talk about your mortgage products. Don't talk about how good you are at a real estate agent. And again, I'm just kind of throwing ideas out here. One lady did a podcast that she also put on YouTube, and she was a real estate agent. She lived in a really large metropolitan area, and I won't say specifically, but all she did was talk about the amenities that all these different communities and subdivisions had. And they went and talked about the playgrounds and whether they had gates and the pools and the gyms and the different cool. She just talked about things that ironically people make a lot of decisions about. So everyone moving to that area was more interested in the amenities than they were, here's the bedroom and bathroom and the eat-in kitchen and the island, right? Unless you're shopping for a home, you don't care. But there was other people in the community that were like, what does someone else have in their, community that I don't have, right? Just go around talking to people. Because for me, I didn't try to quote monetize my podcast. I made more money every year that I did a podcast, but it's because of the relationships that I built. So when you talk about the podcasting culture and a culture of inclusivity, I think it's better framed of podcasting is really about relationships, both with other podcasters and sharing guests. Just because I had a guest that crushed it on mine doesn't mean I'm not going to give that to another podcaster. Hey, let me make an introduction for you, because maybe they have a guest that I couldn't get and they can make an introduction for me.
If I'm going to be a guest on a podcast, is there etiquette?
It's a good question.
I'm trying to figure this out myself because, and I'm honored to be going on yours. I really want feedback on how to be on podcasts, because I don't know how. It's like I'm clearly, I did tend to do this a lot, right? Blanket label. So I'll digress. The social aspect of it. So I'm curious how you think to present oneself on shows where one is more likely to be invited back. That's something I want your opinion on.
I don't know that there's etiquette per se, other than anytime I'm a guest on a podcast, I always want to be very gracious for them having me on and make sure that the people listening understand that they need to continue to listen, right? Helping promote that thing. I think at the end of the day, if someone invites you to be a guest on, it's because they want to ask questions that they want to know. I just try to answer it as best I can, try to add value, make sure as best I can to stay on topic, because we can all go down rabbit holes. But I don't think that there's ever a situation where a host is upset with a guest on a podcast, per se. So when it comes to feedback, you typically will have people reach out to you after you've been on a podcast. Hey, I heard you on this. It was a great job. Or I'm always saying, hey, great. What, just for my sake, what resonated with you? Was there a specific topic that you really found interesting to you or applicable to you? And not that I'm going to try to recreate that, but I'm just interested in the context of that person's audience. What were the people kind of looking for? But yeah, I don't know of a specific etiquette. And as soon as that came out of my mouth again, I did remember, make sure that it's in a quiet place so people can hear you. Audio quality is important in a podcast. Make sure that you have if it's a virtual one, that there's a strong Wi-Fi connection, those types of things. So I think there's some etiquette from a technological perspective, but from the individual guests, I've not seen any rules per se.
Would you recommend to our audience to be on them if they?
Absolutely.
Why?
It's a great way to build more relationships and connections with people. The same way that I ask at certain events to speak and to be on stage, there's podcasts that I've asked to be on. Here's something that I think I can add value of your audience. I'd love to come on. And I think because I have a good network of podcasters, and it's called a podcast swap. You come on my show, I'll come on your show. That happens a lot. I don't think that there's I don't have to ask to be on a ton of podcasts, but if they're a bigger podcast where I don't necessarily have a relationship, I'm like, okay, what is something I could bring to the table and add value to their audience that they would want to have me on? Because now I'm going to have exposure to theirs. But the hack I normally do is invite them on mine, let them get a feel for me and things we talk about, try to not take over the conversation, but insert a little bit of wisdom here and there. And a lot of times when the recording is done, they're like, hey, I need to have you on mine. And that's happened as well. So sometimes the easiest way to be on podcasts is just to ask.
In closing, are you open to people interviewing to be selected to be a part of your acolyte, mentee for M1? And if so, how can people, go through the process of being selected?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. M1 Academy is the mission of M1 Academy is to help people perform and execute at the level they're capable of. And I have a group coaching model and a one-on-one coaching model. And if someone wants to hear more, all they need to do is reach out to me. They can hit me up on pretty much any social media platform. I'm just at Phil Treadwell. They can go to my website, philtreadwell.com. I'm pretty easy to find online, and just reach out and say, hey, I want to hear more about M1 Academy. And my job with people is to help them take all the knowledge that maybe they've learned from other coaches or other performance experts or whatever, and help them create a strategy that applies to them, that's applicable to them. I don't have these set, programs that people go through. We have some pillars that we want to help them identify. And then that's where you stack the tactics on top of it. M1 stands for mindset first. Mindset's not the only thing, but I believe it's the most important thing because our mindset controls our attitude and our actions. And those are the only two things we actually have control of in life. We can't control our clients or our partners or the market. We can't control what we do and how we respond to things. So if we can create a strategy around being deliberate and intentional with our actions and our attitude, we're going to get more results in every area of life. So let's have a conversation. I think we're a great fit for a lot of people. And there's some that haven't been a fit for. So it's really just about having a quick one-on-one. We'll do a 15-minute, half-hour conversation. I'll add some value any way I can, whether you decide to coach with us or not.